For this tutorial, I'm going to walk you through the process of how I made these faux live edge river faceplates using resin and the laser cutter. So this is kind of an interesting take on a file that I already sell, which is the medal holders that you see here. Now I sell it where they're just a solid faceplate and there's different designs of how you can wrap the metal. This is kind of a more advanced version that I wanted to try, and I'm going to walk you through the technique so that you can either try this yourself using my file or apply it to a different project of your own. So let's take a couple more little quick looks at the final project so you can see where we're heading, and then after the tutorial of the file, I'll show you how I did all the molds and everything as well. So here's what they look like. On the inside, you can see I just cut these rings from 1/4 inch acrylic, and this is black acrylic, and then I engraved wells for my magnets and just put a 1/8 inch backer, and they just magnet together. So you run your metal through the slot, fold it up, and magnet it closed. Very, very, very simple. I really think these designs are kind of fun. I know these are not like real, I don't run. These are not really real race medals, they're digital race medals, but they're really cool. I think they're fun, and I like doing the little races sometimes. So here you can see it's got little hanging holes built into the backer plate, and then this is just all glued together with Weld-On and Gorilla Glue Clear for the magnets. If you use super glue, it's going to fog up your acrylic. Don't do that. So very simple. This is what they look like. And now let's take a look really quickly at the process of what we're going to be getting into. So you have two different ways you can do this. You can create these complicated molds like I did and pour your resin, or you can just cut those rivers from contrasting acrylic, and that's going to be the simplest option. But this is a little quick preview. This is all going to be in the blog, but this is essentially what we're heading towards. So you can see in this, all I did was cut the two pieces from wood, and then I left the inner part out, and then I created molds with silicone for the faceplate, and then you stick your little wood pieces in and you pour your resin. And so you can do this 100 different ways. You can make tons of them. It's kind of iterative. So once you cut a couple different designs, you just pop them in. Since the slots are all in exactly the same place, it's pretty easy. The slots also help anchor it in place, which is really nice. I also created an alternate option where the faceplate and the magnet wells and everything is integrated into one piece that's poured. I didn't love this look as much, but if you make some really cool resin stuff, it could be a fun option. And you can see that here. I know it's rotated, but this pour is like the whole side. So it has the edges, so it's one seamless piece, your slots, your magnet wells, everything. And then this is the faceplate version. And I liked this a lot better. This was easier to work with. I didn't mind laser cutting the interiors. It kept the edges really sharp. I didn't have to sand anything. So this is my preferred method, but I did try that out. Making my table level. Here you can see more molds, little details, and then this is essentially what I did. So you can see this is a slightly different design. I just clamped it in place, and then I poured my river, and then when I popped it out, this is what you get. So on the back, sometimes there's a little bit of bleed through, but sometimes you can pop it off. If you have it nice and tight in there, you'll have a lot less, and you can often chip this right off since this is a finished wood. Otherwise, if it was unfinished wood, you could sand it flat. That's kind of up to you, depending on how much effort you want to make. This is on the inside, so I was not worried about it. This is what the outside looked like. So you can see, same kind of deal. That's where we're heading. Now let's take a look at the file I created, and I'll walk you through how I made it. And here we go. So this is what we've got. So these were the shells for my mold. So you can see they're bigger, and then I cut the pieces and I taped them down, and then I poured my silicone to make my molds. That's essentially how I did that. The back plate, I made, I think I used 2 1/4 inch sheets to cut this shape out. So it was at least 1/2 inch thick. And then I glued my pieces in. This is a double. So if you wanted to have the back and the front, or you wanted to be able to do 2 at a time, that's all that was. And then these are my final designs. So here you can see I just took my plate and I just hand drew the river that I was wanting to work with. And then I have them separated right here into 2 pieces. So I can cut this part from wood, this part from acrylic, or vice versa. With these, I could also get kind of 2 at one time, because I could cut one of these faceplates from wood, one of these faceplates from acrylic, and then interchange the pieces. So one has this part as wood and then one has this part as wood and vice versa. But that's essentially it. These are very, very simple to make for the most part. So let me show you how I would do that. I'm going to copy and paste this into a new file just so we can kind of see what we're doing. So here is my river hanger plate. I'm then going to take my pencil tool because I just need a vectorized line. I don't need like thick and thin, so I'm not going to use my brush tool like I normally would. And I'm going to pick a contrasting color so I can see what I'm looking at. And I'm just going to draw my river. Now, one thing I would like you to keep in mind if you do this with my file is don't try to cross these holes too many times, because if you do, it just makes a lot more pieces and a lot more areas where it can leak. So the easiest way would be to just have your river run horizontally and it not even touch these. But if we want to do something interesting, we might still choose to do that. So it just adds a tiny bit of difficulty, but not a major amount. So let's try that. So let's say that that's the river we want to work with. Maybe we want to go really crazy and kind of add an extra one over here. We can do that. Once you're happy with it, you're ready for the next step. I'm going to redraw that one more time because I think I want to do something a little different. And you don't have to make this super jagged. You can make it smooth. You can use other designs, something more complex. Pretty simple. So there's one, and then I think I want to have like a thin piece of wood that kind of runs up the edge here. I think that might look interesting. So I'm going to stick with that. I think that looks good. Do I want an extra piece here? Kind of like what I did. Sure, let's try it. So now that you have this, this is basically your first item. I'm going to copy and paste this by option dragging it out here, because if we want to create this piece where it's all going to cut neatly as one thing, we need to keep that to the side. Now, to make these ones where you have the two pieces separated, all I have to do is hover this over, and then I am going to use one of my Pathfinder functions. So we'll experiment with a couple and see what they do, because I don't usually show that. But if you can't find your Pathfinder, go to Window, Pathfinder, and pop it up. So let's try a couple of these. So if I do intersect, nothing's going to happen. Usually you're going to have to actually use your Pathfinders because it's a more complicated shape. Let's try crop. Now that's only going to give me one shape, not what we want to do. Let's try minus back. So same thing. A lot of these are going to create unpredictable results if you're not used to this. So I'm going to do all the wrong ones and then we're going to do the right one. Outline. So this one may have worked a little better. Let's take a look. It lost its color, so let's give it a stroke. And then let's see what we have. Let's ungroup it. And every piece is its own line. And that's actually one of the methods we do want to use. So now I can actually delete these outer lines like this. And now we have this very neat, simple to cut piece that doesn't have any overlapping lines. That's perfect for this first one. So we discovered kind of the first thing we want to do. That's one method. Let's scoot this out of the way. I'm going to make that purple so that we can kind of see. And now let's go back to this shape, drag it down, and I'll show you the other method. So we're working our way across here. The next one we want to try is the divide. And so that's going to slice everything up. But when I go to right mouse click and ungroup it, you're going to see it's going to have a lot of extra little shapes. So we just need to make sure we delete any of the ones we don't need. So as you can see, as I pulled that out, it created additional shapes that I don't need. So let's delete them as we go. And I know there's a lot here. I probably should have picked a simpler design, but I want to make sure I remove these extra shapes. And then let me move it kind of back together just so I can see what I'm looking at. And then color my inner river areas where I'm going to want to pour the resin a different color so that I can keep track of them. So let's make these pink. And now I can just move them to the side. So I'm going to nest these a little bit so that when I cut them from acrylic, I'm not wasting so much. So there you go. So now I have the version where there's two different shapes. Looks like I made these different pinks. Let's fix that. And then I have the one that's kind of like a solid piece. All of these lines, I can just keep them grouped together and it will cut pretty nicely. Now, I don't think I need these ones in the middle here because I don't need these little inner shapes. So I can actually delete these and then we're ready to go. It's that simple. So I know that wasn't too complicated. It's definitely something you can do yourself. The molds is probably the hardest thing to create, but once you've made those, they're good to go. So that's it. I can save this and call this Live Edge Faceplate 2 and just save that. And then the only other thing is you'll want to use the inside pieces from the other race medal holder file, and those are right here. So these are designed with magnet wells that I engraved, and I'll tell you what my settings were for that in the Glowforge. We'll go look at that really quickly. And so you can kind of see if you do want to create this, you can go back with my other file and set these inner holes to engrave with my settings and then just cut it from 1/4 inch instead of 1/2 inch, and it's going to save you some time. So let's go look at the Glowforge. I think I have it here. This will work with any laser, obviously. This is just my interface. My Glowforge has served me well. One day I'll upgrade, but for now I'm happy. So I've got this here, and you can see these are some things I was cutting recently. If I'm going to engrave my wells, which you can see here, let's go take a look at the settings. So the setting I use for this is called Magnet Wells, very aptly named, and it is 545/80 with 4 passes. It takes a little bit of time to do. I can cut 4 of these and it takes about 30 minutes. The engraving is the slow part. It just is what it is, but I love how neat and orderly it is. You could very obviously just cut these holes and then just glue your magnets in with a little bit of care, or even cut the little circles out of 1/8 inch, glue those in, then glue your magnets on top, and that would save your time if you're batching these out and have to make a lot of them. I don't make these super often, so I don't mind spending a little bit extra time engraving the wells. It just looks super slick. You could also probably 3D print these and get a really cool inner piece as well. And I don't know how fast that is. I don't have a 3D printer, but there you go. Now for the others, this is the same thing. Once again, I can choose to cut these different pieces from wood. I can cut the whole thing from wood, whatever works. I actually just use the pre-finished walnut that's already kind of like slick and clean. I prefer that over using unfinished wood because I don't really want to have to oil these or sand them. If you're trying to be a really perfectionist epoxy maker person, you could run them through a planer later, but if you're already that cool, you might as well just make your own like actual river edge pieces using a CNC. This is kind of my workaround. So that's the file there. That's how everything goes together. Now let's go take a look. I've cut some options out so we can look at those samples, and now we're going to go live and look at them in person. Okay, so let's take a look at the final pieces and then all of the things we need to assemble. So let me scoot some things out of the way. This is what the final piece kind of looks like. So I can open it. Back here, you can see the back. I just have it glued with clear, as well as here are my inset magnets. So they're nice and flush. And then what you do is you just run the metal through the front. You fold it up, just back and forth, and then you magnetize it to the back. So this back one, you can see I haven't peeled all the masking off of it just because I haven't yet. And then there's a hole here that you can run a nail or a tack through, as well as these kind of hangers. So this is what we're going to be making essentially. This is the final. You can see that this particular pigment, or this epoxy, has kind of yellowed a little bit. Some of that, as you can actually see the thing through this, the strap. But I'm still trying to find the perfect epoxy. I struggle a little bit with that, but this is the final piece. Now let's look at the parts and the mold. So I have my actual mold maker blank here. And what this is, I made it double-sided because I didn't want to have to like cut an entirely second backer plate because I'm lazy. And so then I glued the first one here. This is the mold that came from that side. So this is the mold that would include the magnet holes, as well as sort of the sidewall. So that's what this one is. I don't really use this one very much. The other side is this faceplate. So it's designed to look, this isn't the exact faceplate. This one only has one slot. But essentially, I just glued that down to the backer, added a higher, you need it to be higher than the actual piece you're trying to cast, sidewall here. And then I poured that with the same silicone mix. And I just colored this with extra mica pigments I had. You don't need to color it. That's not necessary. And these are what those molds look like. So I have a couple of them. I have 3. So I have this one, and this purple one. And I didn't make them very thick. So you can see they're kind of floppy. If I had built up the sidewalls of this more, it would be a sturdier mold. To get around that, all I did was cut these scrap backer plates, and I just set the molds on them, and that will keep them like level and rigid. So that was sort of my workaround for that. So I have 2 here, and we can make 2 at once. So now you can see these ones are looking a little dirty. So let's take a look and see if I have some spray alcohol, and we do. And I'm going to spray these down with alcohol to clean them. And then I'll show you how we put the pieces in. Now, ideally, you want to have something kind of like lint-free to do this, but these are like hospital rags. And it'll get me there. It'll get the main mess out of the molds. So if I have any like little extra pieces of leftover epoxy, I gotta remove those, as well as any really like obvious debris. You can see it's picking up some different dirt that has accumulated in these. These have not been used for a long time, probably about a year, so they're still good to work. We just gotta clean them out. And once I have them cleaned, the other thing you can do is kind of spray them out with a little bit of canned air to knock out any like little pieces of glitter or extra pieces. I think that'll be fine. I'm not super worried about these being perfect, so I have these 2 ready to go. Set my other molds to the side. And then I actually have these pieces now. So these are the pieces I cut on the Glowforge. I have 2 different sets. So this is the one we drew. And all you do to get these set up is you just press them into the mold where you want them to be. And make sure you have them facing the same way, because you'll notice the grain pattern on a lot of these, since this is real veneer, like walnut veneer, it's different on each side. So just make sure you're using the side that you want to see. I usually put the good side facing out because I find the side I pour tends to be better. It doesn't have that issue with epoxy running underneath. So I'm just going to press those in the best I can, make sure that any like little wood char is gone. And then we'll do the same thing for these. So I could go either direction. So keep that. You can go this way, or I can flip it and go that way. So it's really up to you. I'm looking over there to see what I already have on the wall, because this is one I've used before. And as I stated in the file part, it's always a little easier if this is just all epoxy versus if there's a cut going through it. That's where you're a little bit more likely to have any seeping. You can see I'm missing, where is my rigid plate here? Oh, where did I put it? Because I don't, there we go, got it, okay. So just make sure you press that all the way in and that it's not like tucked up awkwardly or missing. And then these are gonna essentially be ready to pour. But before we do that, I do wanna show you the other parts, and I wanna show you the option that's cut. So this is one that's cut from pearlized acrylic. I have not peeled it all the way. And walnut. And you would just very lightly edge glue those together, but you don't have to get the edge gluing part perfect, because when you look at the frames, they are going to support the pieces when they're connected. So it's more important that you get them glued where the frame is than that you worry too much about this edge. So you don't need to have like a ton of glue and let it squish out everywhere. I would just very lightly tack that when I'm gluing it down to the frame. Or I would even wait and just tape it to hold it in place and then not even edge glue it at all. I think it will probably be strong enough. If not, then I can always add by cutting out like a little shape here and then gluing that down to the back. Or you can see this is the side that cut facing up, so there's almost a little gap. I can actually just probably squeegee in a little bit of glue, and since it's on the inside, it's not the end of the world. This is like the least stickiest tape that's ever existed in the history of humanity. So let's use a little bit better tape. I don't know what's up with that stuff. So I might like tape this just to hold them together. And then I would glue this down. And I think it's supporting at those joining points is going to probably be enough. Otherwise, I might use like a quick setting glue just to kind of fuse these together. So even if you tape it, you can now like separate them, add like some very tiny dots of glue, stick them back together, let them dry, and then glue them to the frame. So if you're going to cut from contrasting pieces, that's how you would do it. That's that. And instead we are going to cast. So you can see more detritus is like falling in here. I also have my backer plate, so let's move these out of the way. And now let's talk about mixing these up and getting these ready. So one thing I want to mention is how I do this is I like to use some little clamps. I think I got these at the Dollar Tree, or they were in a set. These ones I definitely got from Dollar Tree. And you just want to kind of clamp it in at the edges. And then you're going to need somewhere to set this on because the clamps are going to probably make it unlevel. They may or may not, especially if you're using different ones. So I usually use a roll of tape, and I'm just testing that now so that once I've actually poured it or have it ready, we're good to go. So that's how I would set that up. I'd have it set up, ready to go. I'm gonna do the same here. I don't have as many clamps here, but I want to at least get this edge piece because it's kind of floating freely. And I want to make sure it's pressed nicely. You know what? Maybe I don't even have it facing the right way. Let's try. Oh, that fits a little better. Okay, so I got that. I want to make sure this piece at a minimum is clamped because it has very little supporting it. And I do have some larger clamps. Let's grab one of those from behind me. And we'll clamp this down as well. Yeah, my main goal is to kind of try and prevent as much seepage as I can by making sure those are nicely pressed in. And then the same thing, let me find something round. I got some fishing line here to set that on. Make sure that's not laying very level, so maybe I'll get something different. Now I have other rolls of tape. Here we go. Got a big one here. Let's see if it fits without knocking the clamps. Nope. So let's grab a different one. My other go-to is a weld-on can. Don't like that either. There we go. Maybe this one. All right, that works perfect. So it's stable. It's not going anywhere. I'm going to set these up where I want them to be. And now we can move on to actually mixing our epoxy. I'm going to move everything else out of the way. One little tip I want to give you is I try to make sure I write down exactly how much it takes to fill my molds when making my molds and then to fill them after they're made so that I don't overmix my silicone or my epoxy. And then I really like to use these cups. Now they're not see-through, but if you hold them up to the light, you can see how much you're putting in there. And make sure you're double checking when you use your resin, whether it's by weight or by volume, because you cannot interchange those two things. If it's by weight, that's really easy. Just put it on a scale, zero it out, and then pour until you get each weight. If it is by volume, you need to pay attention to how much you're mixing. So I think about 20 milliliters is going to be good here. And you can see I've already got a dirt speck in here. You can use a piece of tape to lift that out. So if you see some like little glitters towards the end right before you pour, you can use tape to grab any of that. And that's because my edges have a bunch of like ash on them, and so it's kind of falling everywhere around here. So I also have my magnets here. I'm going to set those to the side because we might want to glue those after we pour this so that everything kind of dry at once, and then we can stick it all together at the end. I'm going to get my mixing cup. I have some different pigments here. These are cheap ones you can get from Amazon. Black diamond pigment powder is really nice quality. You'll often see this used in like really fancy projects, people's nice river tables, things like that. And then I've got my epoxy. This has been sitting for a while. I generally find it'll still work. It's just sometimes it'll yellow, but this one has not really yellowed. So I'm hoping that means that long term this will do really well. I'm gonna get some rubber gloves because I don't like to be sticky. That's the main reason. But it also, resin is a really common irritant for people. It causes allergies. So it's a good idea to wear respiration if you're very sensitive to that, as well as gloves. So I am definitely gonna do the gloves. I'm all about the glove part. I got these. I used to take these. These are sample spoons from like a frozen yogurt shop, and I would just take them home in my pocket and then clean them. And I love them for this. It's nice to not be wasteful. And there we go. So this one's supposed to be no VOC, so I shouldn't really need a respirator. It's up to you how safe you want to be and how free and loose you want to be with your life. So that's on you. So let's see. I think based on my notes, and these are like a year and a half old. I literally can't remember what these exactly go to. I think I'm going to be good just by looking at this to mix about 1 ounce. Should at least do 1. Maybe I'll do 1.5 ounces. I don't want to waste too much. Maybe 2 ounces. I'll do 2 ounces. That's easy. And then I'll separate it and I'll mix my pigments and pour it in. The way you can check for the volume that you need is, I wouldn't do it with the wood in here just because the wood may swell, but pour some water in, then pour the water into your measuring cup and you'll know exactly how much you need. So for like my actual molds, like if I was going to fill this whole thing with epoxy, that's what I would do. And then I would let it dry and come back to it once it was done. So let's see. I'm going to mix 2 ounces. That's probably going to be more than I need. It's nice to have like a little off pouring mold ready, like jewelry molds or things like that, that you can pour your extra into. And I can see from my angle, you probably cannot see this. I can see the lines through the cup just based on the light. So that's 1 ounce there. Try not to mix up your lids, because if you do, they may mix and then fuse the lids to the top. So not my favorite. Probably a good idea to mark the top with like the hardener, the H, or with the epoxy part. Now, generally, I like to put the thinner liquid first. These are pretty similar in viscosity, but the thinner liquid first and then the heavier liquid after, so it starts to pour down into it. Because if you don't, you're going to find sometimes it's a little hard to mix. Now, these are pretty similar. They're not too different in viscosity. And you can use a lot of different pigments. You can use alcohol ink. That works pretty well. That'll give you something nice and transparent. I like the powdered pigments because if you do have yellowing, they tend to hide it a lot better. And now in the blog post, you're going to see in the picture section that I also have like a vacuum chamber. When you're mixing like a large cup of epoxy, leave a lot of space in the cup. And if you put it in a vacuum chamber versus a pressure pot, so like a vacuum chamber will pull bubbles out. A pressure pot will shrink them down so that they're invisible. You kind of, if you can fit the mold in a pressure pot, you can do it that way. Vacuum chamber is going to make it really foamy and bubbly, but it will pull a lot of the bubbles out. I'm just going to mix really carefully. And this is going to be a very boring part of the video because it's going to take me about a minute or two. I might speed this up, but I want to make sure that this is mixed perfectly. And I can already tell I have probably way too much. So I may pour an extra one after this or pour it into another mold. But once you've done it once, you can take some permanent marker and just write on your mold exactly how much you needed. And that will help. It's a little better to have a little too much versus not enough. And as I'm mixing this, it's very hard for you to see this probably. You probably can't even see it on video. But I can often see like the streaks of the hardener going through. And I want to just make sure it's incredibly even. I want to scrape the sides, but I don't want to whip it because I don't want to introduce too many bubbles. If you get bubbles, once you've poured it, some of them are going to push out on their own. If you lightly spritz with alcohol, that will pop a lot of surface bubbles. You can also use a blowtorch or a flame. That will cause them to rise to the surface and pop. But be careful about that because 1, you can set it on fire. 2, some molds are very sensitive to heat. So if you're buying pre-made molds, you'll find some of them tell you not to use heat to pop the bubbles. And that's because if you heat it, it will cause your resin to almost fuse to it and be almost impossible to pop out. So it's kind of up to you. Using pigment powders also does tend to hide bubbles a little better as well. And I like the look of it for these especially, versus I don't really want them to be too clear, because if they're clear, then you're going to be seeing the strap of the metal behind that river area, which doesn't look so good. You don't really want to see the guts of this thing, the nail through it and all that. So you want it nice and opaque. If you find you're struggling with it being too thin, you can also let this sit for like 10, 15 minutes. You might want to read your instructions on your actual bottle. They'll kind of tell you what the cure time is. And you can let it kind of harden up a little bit beforehand. You could, of course, also do this with UV resin, and you may have seen that in previous posts of mine. I don't really love UV resin. I haven't found one I really liked. I find them to be kind of sticky and filmy, even when cured. Like I'll cure it for 10, 15 minutes, put it in the sun, all of that, and I find it still has like a sticky layer on it. And then if you try and wipe that off with alcohol as you normally would, you'll then also find that it leaves like a haze. So I find that actual 2-part resins cure much harder and glossier. And so even though it's an absolute pain to sit here and like mix for like 1,000 hours, I prefer it. There's probably someone out there though that knows like the perfect UV resin, and it's somewhere out there, but I have no idea which brand is the best. I'm still experimenting with a lot of these resins. I will tell you one resin that was very cheap that I liked in the beginning but has yellowed horribly in a lot of art I've made is Total Boat. I do not recommend that one. I've heard good things about art resin, and I have another one that I might show you after this is mixed. So let's see. I want to make sure I'm scraping the bottom, the sides, everywhere. And I think that looks pretty good. So I think we can go on to mixing our pigments now. And these look a little dirty. Let me see if I have some slightly cleaner little cups. Now, the cups I use for this are not super important because the stuff's already mixed. So I just want to make sure it's clean enough that I'm not going to get any like little chunks of dirt. So I have some more alcohol and I have a cloth here. I'm just going to wipe them out. Only because I've clearly used these for something before and I don't remember what. I don't know if these are medicine caps. I don't remember where I got these. Okay. So medicine caps are a good one if you clean them out. All right, that looks clean enough. Let's pour a little in. Now we can definitely see our bubbles a little bit more. All right, I'm going to leave the clear here. And I'm only separating this out to add the color because I have 2 different colors I want to use. Otherwise, I would just mix the color right into that cup and then discard it when I was done. So let's do a purple one because why not? I'm sure I can find something for this. See if I can open the package, will be good. All right, come on. Rubber gloves make it a little hard to work. Yes, all right, cool. So there's my powdered pigment. It's kind of like a blue purple with interference. And you want to make sure your pigment to resin ratio is not too high. I probably put way too much in there. That just fell off the spoon a little more than I was anticipating because it can affect your cure. So for example, if you I haven't really had this happen to me to be completely honest with you, but I have heard that. So like if you're putting glitter in there, I've had really high ratios of glitter and not had an issue with cure, but I think like especially liquid pigments, sometimes you can have an issue with it affecting the cure time. So make sure you read the instructions on the pigments you use. I feel like with solids, it's maybe less of a problem. So we're just going to mix it. I've definitely spilled a little, but I think this will still be fine. And so I have almost an ounce here. I want to make sure I don't have any clumps because if it's got clumps, they'll cure as little air pockets. But that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to begin pouring gently. And because I don't want to mess up, so I'm just going to walk it around here. I can use a toothpick if I need to. And if I have to mix a little bit more, I can. And it's nice and liquid, so it's going to flow pretty good. But don't get too attached to the pattern you create. There's a heat. The catalyst of the hardener causes this to give off heat, which will move the design around. So you can swirl it to perfection and then it's going to keep moving unless you wait till it's like a thicker, more gelatinous texture. And then at that point, you may have a little better control over the swirl. So don't make all these beautiful swirls right this second and expect that they're going to stay, because there's no promises there. Now from here, I'm going to see if I can find a toothpick or a little point that says broken off of a plastic fork. And I'm going to move it gently to the edges so that I don't get an air bubble right at an edge. And then I might pour a little bit more because I think I'm low here. And I'm going to do the same here. It's working its way. You don't want to over pour because it's very hard to correct that, but we can add a little bit more if we need to. Yeah, I think we could use, it's looking kind of right there. I think we can pour the tiniest little bit that's left in here into this. And it looks like I got that measurement right. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm now just going to let that sit and cure. And now let's pour our second one. I'm just going to wipe this off on my throwaway rags. This I will just let harden and toss it. There's not enough there to save. And now for this one, I can just mix my pigment right into it because I don't need a second cup. So let's do the same thing that we just did with the blue. Let me wipe my hands off a little bit so I don't get too much purple in there. And let's see where we're at. So last thing is I'm just going to keep an eye here. I'm going to look. None of my clamps are in the way of anything. So I should be good. I'm just going to tap some in. So I'm happy with the amount. Okay, let's go with that. I think that looks pretty good. It's less than I would say a teaspoon. And let's mix that in. I have a little more room so I can mix a little bit better here. And we'll see how these cure. So just checking for any bubbles, chunks. Yeah. All right, that looks pretty good. I definitely probably have too much, but let's pour this one. And remember, if you keep an eye, you can take your tape and grab any little dust specks that might have escaped. And I want to pour pretty carefully. One little tip is if you have two different sections, you see what I just did there? Dripped it. Don't try to go across, like come out and then come over here, because you don't want to drip it on your surface. You can wipe it off with some alcohol, but sometimes that's a little hard to do. So I'm going to try and think very carefully and like move my way out and around. So I'm not going to drip it all over my mold, just because I want this front side to be the good side. So I want to kind of really take care here to not have a bunch of over stuff. I hate sanding. Like I hate sanding more than almost anything. Probably I think I hate removing masking more than sanding, which is why I use dish soap as my masking for everything, which I did do for these. So by the way, I did not have masking on these. I just rubbed them with Dawn dish soap, laser cut them, and then used a barely damp rag or a tiny spritz of alcohol if your item will tolerate alcohol, and wipe it off. I am not a fan of peeling off masking. It's like my least favorite job. So that and sanding, those two things are like kind of essential for a lot of projects, and I'm not into it. So we're going to avoid those as much as possible. So now I'm at a stage where I want to start guiding it around into any of the corners. And then I can add a little more as needed. This will just help it flow and bind to the wood. And we don't want any bubbles like right at the seams. So let's move this one over. We got to get it to kind of head down this channel, which it will do. Yes. There we go. And now let's try and walk it this way. You can see the levels like starting to lower a little bit as it's moving very, very slowly. And then once we get that in there, I'll add a little bit more. And then it should self-level at that stage. So the copper is really pretty. I like that. Let's add a little bit more very slowly so we can watch and make sure we don't overfill it. Like that. Pull it out. Come around. Tiny bit more here. If you do overflow, you can sand. I just am going to avoid that like the plague. So there we go. I feel like, oh, see, I got some on the surface here. So I'm going to need to very, very carefully remove that. Now I can wait until it's cured, but I'm gonna do my best to do it now. Unfortunately, it also landed right next to a clamp, and I don't want it to seep under the clamp and then make a nasty mark on the surface. So I'm gonna remove this glove so I have a little more control. I'm going to scoot this clamp out of the way because it has resin on it now. I'm gonna take a doe foot applicator. I'm gonna apply a tiny bit of alcohol to it off screen here. And then I'm gonna try and just gently move that out of the way. I'm gonna wipe it off on a cloth. I'm gonna do the same thing. I wanna save myself later work. So we're gonna try and clean things up now. And I think that looks okay. I can see that some seepage is coming this way. I don't think there's much I can really do about that. The piece is clamped where it's clamped. There's nothing I can really do. That's the issue you may have with like floating pieces like this. So if they don't have any structure where they're holding on to anything, sometimes you'll see that happen. But we'll see how it looks when it actually cures. So that's it for this part of the video. Let's wait for this to cure. We'll come back, we'll pop these out, and then we'll actually begin assembly. All right, so everything has dried, and now we're going to talk about how to assemble the final pieces. So now that these are dry, I'm going to pop these out of the mold, or at least this first one, and let's see how it went. So we'll remove the backer plate, peel it away, and you can see the back actually doesn't look too bad. We do have a little bit of seepage, but it doesn't look bad. I am noticing, I think this art resin is a little bit on the more flexible side, so you might want to pick something else, but I'm going to see how these look over the next couple of years. We'll find out. Let's remove the copper one as well. And this one I was a little more worried about because we might have some extra. So we have a little bit on the edge there. It doesn't look terrible. This one actually looks pretty good too. We don't have a lot that has seeped under. So if this was unfinished, which you could sand that down probably pretty easily. If you find you have any kind of weird areas like this, I recommend a Dremel tool. I have the wrong bit on here, but I love these like battery powered ones. So I probably will clean that up a little bit later. You don't really need to see that. I'll just either take a tiny piece of sandpaper and clean up that edge or use the Dremel. So this one looks pretty good as well. So we have our copper. We have our purple. Let's move our molds out of the way because we probably are going to use this again. And let's take a look at our magnets. So I have a couple tips for the magnets and for peeling. I like to actually put the magnets in before I peel the masking if I have masking. If I don't have masking, I just have to be a little bit more careful. But if I have masking, I find it's a little bit easier. So I glued 3 of them in already so that you could see the technique I was going to use here. And you can see I have these properly aligned. So no matter how I put them on here, they're going to magnetize. So this set is pretty much already done. I'm going to set that to the side here. And now let's take a look at this set here. So I'm going to peel this one real quick because we are going to glue these onto our actual base plate in a minute. And this is the 1/4 inch that I have. So I use a needle to lift my masking. I've been doing it for so long. It's the fastest way without sort of like breaking your nails. And I just kind of come in at an angle and try and grab it just so I get a grip. And then if you have some charring on your masking that makes it hard to remove, a plastic razor blade will typically take that off. And let's see, looks like I'm gonna have to use my nails for this part because it's just a tiny little piece. Let's peel that. That looks good. Now let's do the back. And then I'll show you the magnets. We'll glue them up. And then that'll be that for this project. So the clear looks pretty good. Looks really nice. One thing to keep in mind when you glue these to your actual faceplates is these bump out areas. You don't want them to end up in the wrong spot where they're covering the slots. That's probably really obvious when you actually assemble. But all I'm going to do to glue these is I'm going to use Gorilla Glue Clear. And then I'm just going to stick them on. I'm going to re-put the clamps on, and then I'm going to dry them in the exact same place on top of these tape rolls. But let's do the magnets here. So one of the hardest things about working with magnets for the first time, you can see, oh my gosh, I have so much powder pigment here, is making sure they're all correctly aligned. And I've made this mistake definitely more than once. But the trick to this is when you use your magnets to keep them in their little column stack. And when you place them in, just set them, you put some glue in first, and then you're just going to set them in and then slide this off. And then it's pretty easy to put the magnets into the holes. Now, with these, when I'm doing a set of these, I do, let's say I'm doing 12. I do 6 one way, and then you have to flip the stack and do the 6 other ways so they align. Now, if you've already made some and you need to check, just figure out what direction you need to do by sticking it onto one of the ones that's already completed. And now I know that's going to be how I get them to connect. So when I actually apply it, I need to flip it because I need them to face each other, which means this is the side that needs to be glued down. So I'm going to sit that there. I'm going to add my glue, and I'm just going to add a tiny dot. I do not recommend super glue. There are some super glues you can get away with that won't haze it. And if it has masking on like this, you might be okay. I still don't recommend it. I hate waiting for glue to dry. It's like my least favorite thing ever. But it's better than doing the whole project and then there's like hazy super glue fog all over it. And I had a little bit of burnt masking in there. So I'm going to do pretty much the smallest dot I can because if it's too thick, it's going to go everywhere. Now I'm going to remember, okay, so all of these magnets are facing this way. Take my column, flip it, and then do exactly what I showed you. So slide them into the spot and then just slide the magnet stack out of the way. And then get that out of the way. I'm going to put this over with my magnet case because they'll get stuck to everything. And if you used too much glue and it's squishing out the sides, just take like a paper towel or a clear cloth and gently press them in so that they're nicely inset, and then it'll wipe out any of the excess glue as it squishes out the sides. This is why it's nice to leave the masking on for this stage. If you don't, you just have to be way more careful with your glue to not get it everywhere. And then put a little bit of maybe Novus plastic cleaner on here, and when you do this and try to get it off if it squishes out that way. Now while this one dries, we can take this one and glue it down. So we're going to take our glue. Thank you. My cat is yelling for no reason in the background. And this does dry pretty clear. I generally will use black for these because I don't like to see any glue at all. But it is what it is. So I'm going to stick this like this. And then we're going to apply it. But the thing is with this design, you're not really seeing the inside unless you're applying, just putting your metal strap in. So it's not the end of the universe that the inside of these is not perfect, at least for me. And then I still have access to sand that later. So once I have it perfectly aligned, I might check for any glue squish out very lightly. I'm not trying to push it around. And I think this has enough adhesion. I don't actually want to use the clamps. Sometimes if you're not very careful with them, if you put too many on one side, they'll slowly push it out of alignment. So I'm just gonna manually align it. I know my table's level enough that I can just set this here like that, and it's going to adhere just fine. And then I can do the same with this one. So I'm just gonna take one side of the masking off for speed. Peel that off. Sorry, there's no stopping that cat, and I'm filming, so I can't redo it once it's already glued, so we're stuck with her. All right. Perfect, get that out of the way. And then I have, this is like a needle minder, has a magnet inside, keeps my needles from stabbing me later. And then I'm gonna do the same thing here. So let me think, I've got that one, which will go to this one, and I've got this one, which can go to that one. So let's double check. Yep, these still align. Perfect. Another thing you might want to keep in mind is making sure, if you're doing these for yourself, you want to make sure like all the north magnets are on the back side or the front side so that you can interchange the tops. You may not need to do that, but that's how I'm going to check this. So, okay, so this one magnetizes to this, so I want it to be the back. This is actually the one I want to go on the faceplate. That way I know the faceplates all have magnets going to the same pole, so I can exchange the tops on my faceplates. And I usually do check this with my other ones. You're not usually swapping them out, especially if you're doing like my traditional metal design where they have colored sides. You're gonna always know the red one goes to the red, the purple one goes to the purple. But for these, I'm gonna try and do that. And apply our glue. And then after that, we'll take a look at our, actually, let's do that now. So I have more of these elsewhere. Let's worry about them later. I'm not going to glue that one. Instead, let's take a look at this one here. So this is the one where it fits together. I have some tape holding it together, and we want to glue it down. So I'm going to remove the tape so that I can remove this masking really quickly. We're going to add a little glue to the seam, and then I'm going to glue it down, and you can see final photos of it in the blog. So let's see. It looks like actually this is even the nicer pearlized side, so I may want this side to face out. There's a lot more like swirl action on that side, so perfect. That kind of gives me an indication that I want that to be the inside. I'm not going to set that there. Take some tape and stick them together like I had before. Just making sure that the tape, I know you can't see this on the camera because of the angle, but I just want to make sure the tape is clear of where there's going to be any glue. Then I'm going to gently crack this like this with the tape and add just a small amount of glue. You can even like spread this with your finger or a small, one of those dough foot applicators, which you can get in like huge packs of like 100 or 200. I use them to spread glue all the time. They're better than brushes. And since they're one use, I will use them again as stir sticks so that I'm not wasting plastic. But since they're one use, it saves you a lot of money. So then we're gonna re-squeeze that together. And a little bit of glue has come out, so I'm going to take some alcohol. I probably just got glue on this cloth. That's fine. Put it on the cloth. And then I will gently wipe any excess glue out of the way. And then I'm going to place this on here as it is, get it nicely lined up. And in this case, I'll just let that dry. I can feel with the edges of my fingers that I have it nicely lined up. We can lift it now, and I can gently wipe off any excess that has squeezed out. Get it nicely aligned. Check for any more glue anywhere. So I'm just feeling that lightly with my fingers. And now this one can dry as well. So let's just set that one here. And then once those are dry, I'll take some photos and you'll see them in the final blog.